Welcome back to Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm Dan Mariaschin, B'nai B'rith CEO. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're speaking with longtime Newark Star-Ledger sports columnist Jerry Izenberg about his Jewish upbringing in Newark, New Jersey, his illustrious career as a newspaper reporter, the important relationships he developed along the way, and we'll talk some sports as well. Now, if you enjoy this series, make sure you subscribe to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and like us on Facebook to watch all of our latest interviews. And of course, visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our humanitarian and advocacy efforts across the globe. Well, he's been to 58 Kentucky Derbies. He's one of only two daily newspaper columnists to have covered the first 53 Super Bowls. He's attended countless Olympics, World Cups, boxing matches, including many Muhammad Ali fights, starting with the 1960 Olympics, and he considered Ali to be a close personal friend. My guest today is legendary Newark Star-Ledger sports columnist Jerry Izenberg, who I'm so pleased could join us. Jerry is here to talk about his new memoir, Baseball, Nazis, and Nedick's Hot Dogs, Growing Up Jewish in the 1930s in Newark, which details his Jewish upbringing in Newark, New Jersey, and the love, community, and purpose that he found during a fraught period of anti-Semitism, depression, and World War. And of course, we'll talk some sports too. Jerry Izenberg is a longtime columnist for the Newark Star-Ledger, 72 years to be precise. A recipient of the prestigious Red Smith Award for sports writing, he has been named the New Jersey Sports Writer of the Year 5 times. He's an inductee into 17 Halls of Fame, including the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Hall of Fame and the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. In addition to his new memoir, he's also the author of books including Once There Were Giants, The Golden Age of Heavyweight Boxing, No Medals for Trying, A Week in the Life of a Football Team, and Roselle, a Biography. Jerry, it's an honor to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be asked to go anywhere now.
Well, we're glad you're with us today. As the title Baseball, Nazis, and Nedick's Hot Dogs suggests, your memories of coming of age in the 1930s Newark touches on what you lived through and what you did not, both of which helped to determine the person that you would become. What would you like readers to take away from reading about this first part of your life? It covers, I think, pretty much through the Korean War, which would be about
22 years.
What would you just come away with?
Well, what I would take away, I would like them to take away. Number one, I like them to know my father because he was a rare human being. And he was a jack of all trades. He was a minor league baseball player, very low minors, second baseman, good hit, no field. Thought he could play for the Giants one day. That's what he lived to do. And he never made it. I don't know how good he was, but he never left the Giants. The Giants never joined him, but he never left them. They were without a pennant from 1937 until 1951, and without a World Series title until 1954. And it was amazing. I always said, if you want to know, that we had three teams in New York. We had the Yankees, and I paid no attention to them. The Yankees were the flag carriers for Wall Street. They didn't lose. There was no drama. There was no fun. The Dodgers were crazy. Dodger fans were crazy. Only 32,000 seats, and when they got going, it seemed like there were 90,000 people. And the Giant fans, I refer you to the Bible, because to be a Giant fan, you had to be a body double for Job. The pestilence, the wrestling, everything. Come on, keep throwing at me, God. One day you're going to throw me a pennant. But it took a long time.
Well, your dad was an inveterate fan, even though he played baseball. And he had next to him, as you write, this old Philco radio. So the games were being broadcast and everything else stopped, I think, in your house when the game came on. Would you say?
Well, not exactly. Well, in the summer, he'd sit at one end of the porch. He always made rules. My mother would sit at the other end of the porch with a rabbi, Joachim Prince, who was my rabbi, her rabbi. My father, not so much, but he lived on our block, or block from us. So they were his first friends in America. And I was really, I just loved the guy. When I found out he rode the Freedom buses, and I mean, There were no moments of doubt with Dr. Prince. But they would sit down one end, and I got a quarter a week to take his kids to school, to his boys to school. And they would talk about the school because my sister and I went to the same school as his kids. But they talked very softly because my father was listening to the Giants. And all of his pain and all of his suffering was constantly punctuated by on top of the Philco radio. That meant that Mel Ott hit into a double play, Carl Hummel walked the guy, whatever. But we heard a lot of bangs. That was the strongest rate. I don't know how they must have made it out of forged iron. And they were not allowed to talk loudly. One day he comes and violates the rule. Well, he's a rabbi, but he still violates the rule. He's halfway up the steps. He says, "Harry, I need a favor." My father looks at him and says, "Not now. Mel Ott is coming to bat. I am sure if the Messiah came to 80 Shanley Avenue in Newark, New Jersey that night and said, 'Harry, it's time we had our talk,' he would say, 'Can it wait a minute or two? Mel Ott's coming up.'"
Well, Rabbi Prince was certainly, he was a great leader of our community. And as you said, a great leader in the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
Tell us about your mom. You write about her as well.
My mother was in many ways the backbone of the family, and she was a typical Jewish mother. When my father worked in a dye house, dyeing furs, and when the mouton coats, which came out of sheep, became popular, and they were cheaper, and the fur business was going down the toilet for a long time, she wanted to help him out. She had a brother-in-law who was a furrier but sold mouton coats and took an order on consignment from her. So my father comes home one day and he hates sheep at that point. He hates the mouton. He hates everything about it because it's costing him money and he's taking pay cuts. And he says, "I ran into a friend of mine, Mark Robart, today from Patterson, the old days, and I invited him and his buddy Sunday for dinner." My mother says, "No, impossible." My mother never said nothing like that. "What do you mean impossible? The dining room is otherwise occupied." "By who?" "Not by who, by what? Go down and take a look." He goes down, he opens the dining room door, and he sees what's in there. 3 racks of mouton coats. And he didn't scream, he didn't holler. He gave out a geschrei, which is a holler times 10. And he said, "What's going on in my house?" And she said, "Don't get excited. I have a little business here." Well, the battle went on for quite some time. And my father, he finally had to surrender, as he always did to her when she made up her mind, but she always made him think it was his idea. So she said to him, "Listen, I'm adding a line of blouses." My father says, "Blouses?" "Yes, everything is moving." I walk in, I had never been in the dining room. We didn't eat in the dining room. We ate supper in the kitchen. I walk into the dining room and I see a 4-sided mirror. Where the hell she got that from, I don't know. And one day I hear, "Darling, that coat is you. It is you, believe me." "Well, I don't know how much, but don't worry, we can handle it. It'll work easily. Don't worry about it." Well, all of a sudden, a certified letter comes. She says to me, "Open it. I don't like those letters." I open the letter. I see the word cease and desist from both the IRS and from Bamberger's department store, which was Macy's in downtown Newark. "You're violating. You don't have a license to be in business. You're violating everything we believe in. And this gentleman from the IRS wants to talk to you. We'll send him over." About a week, my mother says, she takes the letter, puts it in her apron, says, "Don't tell your father." I'm not getting into that argument. Now it's a week later, the doorbell rings. 2 guys in 3-piece suits. Nobody comes to my house wearing a suit. Nobody. And they stand there and they say, "Oh, we'd like to see Sadie Izenberg." Now I'm figuring, do I yell run to her? What do I do? She comes in, she says, "I am Sadie Izenberg." And she's all set. And they say, "Well, we come to take these coats away. They belong to Bamberger's, not to you. And we've come to," and the blouses too. My mother had fingers, arthritic fingers the size of sausages. And she said, she puts her hand up, she says, With my own fingers, I sewed those blouses. I mean, she maybe a jackhammer she could operate with those fingers, but not a thread needle. And you're taking nothing with you, nothing. And the guy said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. But he said, look, we're all reasonable people. Let's go in the kitchen. We'll sit down. We'll talk. I just got a fresh coffee cake from Keel's Bakery on Hawthorne Avenue. She made that one word. And come in, we'll see. They go in. I'm saying, geez, do I have to pack a lunch for her when they take her away? And then I hear laughing in the kitchen. And then I hear more laughing. They come out laughing. They walk out. They got nothing in their hands. They go out the front door. A week goes by. I never see them again. I said, what happened in there? She said, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish with a fresh coffee cake from Keel's Bakery on Hawthorne Avenue. That was my mother.
Well, there was also a touch of an entrepreneurial touch there as well.
Oh, yeah.
So it was the cake, and it was the entrepreneurial effort that she made. Jerry, you grew up in the 30s, and in the lead up to the Second World War, the title of your book strongly suggests you contended with anti-Semitism, both in small ways and large ways during your youth. You also write about what was going on in the 30s in terms of the German-American Bund.
We lived 10 blocks from the borderline between Irvington and Newark. Irvington was really rabid German Bund territory. In fact, the state headquarters were up there in a bar called News, N-E-U-S. And there was a lot of traffic between fist fights and everything else. We had no diplomatic relations with Irvington, and they had none with us. And my father made me aware as much as he could, although he didn't have to. One day I come home and I see, I'm out there, and how old was I? About 8 years old. And the sidewalk is tilted, And I said, well, when you don't maintain it. And written, but I can see it today, written on that tilted sidewalk in blue chalk was, all Jews are kites. Well, I knew I couldn't fly. So I go home to my father. I said, why would he say I'm a kite? He says, listen, all it tells you is that this is an illiterate moron who's bigoted. The words he tried to say was kike and Jew bastard and sheeny and yid and etc. Now, I don't care if somebody comes to you and says, so-and-so said you were a sheeny, or so-and-so, that doesn't count. Someone has to say it to your face. But if they say it to your face, here's what you will do. You will smile so they relax, and you will hit them with the best right hand you have within you. And if you don't finish with a left hook, do not come home. And, well, it's interesting, look at the title of the book. We taught baseball because that was my friend. And Nazis were right across the borderline. And Nedick's hot dog all comes from the cover of the book. The cover of the book, my old man and I are walking down the Four Corners in Newark. He's got on a top coat and a fedora, and he raises two fingers every time he passes a good-looking woman on the fedora. I got on a coat that Nelson Eddy must have worn in one of those movies, the lumberjack movies. I got knickers, brown knickers, long brown stockings, and a little hat, a ski hat they called it. There were no earmuffs in those days. Little laps dropped down. They didn't do any good. I'm walking with them. Behind us is the marquee of the Newsreel Theater. And we've just been there. I'm 8 years old, but he said, what are you doing Saturday? I said, I'm going to play some baseball. He said, no. You're going with me. Why am I being punished? You're going with me. Keep your mouth shut. It was the week after the German-American Bund rally in Madison Square Garden. 20,000 Nazis, 12,000 of them in stormtrooper uniforms. And I saw the film, so I know I could reconstruct it. George Washington, like 30 feet high, swastikas, and 1,000 drummers on the platform waiting to do it. And Fritz Kuhn, who was going to be the Gauleiter, the guy who ruled America if Hitler won, he was the head of the German-American Bund, and he's the speaker. Now, like I said, there were only two topics you were allowed to talk about at supper. Baseball, that was fine. The Nazis, my father did all that talking. And if you wanted to talk about anything else, you had to get permission to change the subject. Those are the two things that he wanted me to learn about. And it was constant, and it was wonderful. I was the only 8-year-old. My sister was the only 10-year-old in Newark, New Jersey, and maybe in America, who knew what the Reichstag was, why it was burned, and who burned it. And I knew that when I was 8. So when we come out of the theater, my father was in World War One, enlisted the first day of the war. He had come from Lithuania when he was 8, and he said, "We owe this country." And he was wounded in World War One in France. So he had very strong feelings. Now we're walking out of the theater, and he's still, now all of a sudden, I never see him like this. He's almost shaking. And he says, those mumsers. And to non-bilingual listeners in this show, he was saying bastards. I helped stop them in 1917. They got to be stopped again. And this little kid with an 8-year-old mentality says, but they're in Berlin, Dad. He says, no, they're not. They're here. And boy, I learned fast, because that was the year that we had Lewis and Schmeling. That was the year that Hank Greenberg hit 58 home runs. And my father said if he wasn't a Jew, he would hit 69, because they walked him 12. Later on, when I got into business, I said, Dad, you got this all wrong. I know Lewis. I know Schmeling, which I did. They're good guys. What you don't understand is Lewis wasn't fighting for America. He was fighting because this guy had knocked him out 2 years earlier, and he was mad. And Schmeling was trying to win back a world title. That's all it was. And he said, well, maybe. And then I said, later on, I told when I got into business, I said, Hank Greenberg, it wasn't anti-Semitism. He did get 10 walks the last 12 days of the season. And I do think he would have broken the record had he not. But I said, Dad, you got to understand, it's the pitcher doesn't want his name linked forever with Hank Greenberg. He gave up the 61st home run ball. My father said, that's a good theory, but you're still full of crap. I remember, now I got to tell you one story about the times we lived in. Father Coughlin, well, first we got to understand, it was a preview for what we got now. But we will win this thing because we won under much heavier odds back then. You had Joe Del K. Smith had a passion play in the Ozarks about the perfidious Jews. You had William Dudley Pelley in the silver shirts. Mussolini and Hitler took all the colors out of the shirts. They made them silver shirts. We had anti-Semitism, a guy named Condi McGinley, who put out a newspaper union about the Jews. And we had Father Coughlin on the radio. My father doesn't know from nothing who's Father Coughlin. One day we're in the kitchen having supper. The radio priest of the year comes on, and he says, some of you are hard. My father worked 6.5 days a week. Hard times. But I'll tell you what it is. It's Wall Street. It's Wall Street. They're the reason. And next week, I'm going to explain Wall Street. My father turns to my mother. He says, the guy makes sense. I'm going to send him a donation. I'm going to send him he sends $3 to the biggest anti-Semite in the Western Hemisphere. The following week, the radio is on again. Father Coughlin comes back. I told you I'd explain this to you. It's the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. My father is just about to drink his coffee. He throws the cup at the wall. It scatters, it splinters, and turns to my mother. This is true because I heard every word. He turns to my mother and he says, I sent that mumser $3 last week, $3. And he talks like this. My mother says to him, you think maybe we could get a refund? She was always, because he was about to go off.
Jerry, I just want to say one thing, because you mentioned the cover of the book.
Yeah,
it's a magnificent cover. You reference the scene of you and your father, and you're in that bundled up, and your father's got his overcoat and he's got his fedora, and you've got the theater in the background. It's beautifully done, really, and it really sets the mood, I think, for the book. But now we're moving into the 1940s, and you're sent to a military school. Followed later by a serious military school, which was a VMI, Virginia Military Institute.
Well, it wasn't VMI, that was college. This was Augusta Military Academy, and it's etched in my brain forever. The first thing that happens is I'm failing algebra. Well, I hated the place to begin with. I hated everybody anyway, but I was a bad kid. Never to my parents, but to everybody else and every other adult in the universe. So Major Roller was the half owner of the school with his brother. He gave himself the title. He was a major, and he was my algebra teacher. He was the worst teacher I ever had in my life. And I was failing algebra. I knew it. So his door was always open, he said. So I go in there at 6 o'clock and I salute Cadet Izenberg, sir. What do you want? Well, you said your door is always open. I need a favor. Oh, what do you want? I'm failing algebra, and you know that better than I do. I just want an hour extra after lights out to try to catch up. And he looks at me and he says, why is it you Jews always want a bigger piece of the pie? I had to bite my tongue so hard, I must have bled, but I didn't say what was on my mind. And I thought when I walked out of there, he says, I want a bigger piece of the pie, right? I'm a rat, which is a freshman, has no status, no nothing, rules that you have to follow that are ridiculous. And as a rat, it's mandatory. I go every Sunday night to the YMCA meeting on the campus. I sing Living for Jesus. And every third or fourth week of the semester, he brings in an evangelist named Carrie Barker from Lynchburg, Virginia, who is insisting, unless I get up and come to Jesus in the front of the room, I'm going to burn in hell eternity. And he wants a bigger, the son of a bitch swallowed the whole pie. I also had another rival there. He was a band director. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I was a pretty gifted musician. I played 5 instruments. I took arranging and composing, and I love music. And I thought that's what I was going to do for a living. Well, the band director was a guy, he was from Germany, but had nothing to do with that. What it was, he was typical. He said, John Philip Sousa wrote the Washington Post marks this way. That is the way you will play it, and you will enjoy it. Well, I hated the guy, and he hated me. Well, I was a wise ass. I really was, because I was not going to fit in. I made up my mind I was not going to fit in. I had so many penalty tours. They gave me demerits. You had to walk, rain, snow, anything else in an oblong square in front of the barracks. 2 times around, made 1 penalty tour. If you didn't have penalty tours, you could go into town, Staunton, Virginia, on Monday when our school was closed. I saw Staunton 3 times in 4 years. That's how many penalty tours I piled up. And Manch didn't like me, Major Manch. He was the band director, but I was good. And we had several gifted musicians. We formed an orchestra, which is another story, without him. Anyway, he comes to me my senior year, the first band meeting, walks into the band room, says, pack up that clarinet. I thought he was throwing me out of the band, which he should have. I was always a troublemaker. He comes back with a baritone horn, which is about this big, puts it in my lap, and he says, you know everything. You think you know everything. So you will play this horn, and you will be ready in 12 days for the first dress parade, or there's going to be some real problems for you. And he said, and don't bother with me because you're so smart. I'm sure you can figure it out. He's walking away, and he looks over his shoulder, and he says, the only thing I'm going to tell you is the fingering is the same as a trumpet. And then he's gone. I go to the first trumpet player, who was a hell of a jazz player, too. And he shows me the fingerings. Well, it's not a melodic instrument. It's more of an oompa kind of instrument. So I mastered it in 3 days. I show that son of a bitch. Now it's the first parade, and I'm playing my ass off. And I said, I showed him. And they said, what I show? I showed him nothing. I never got to my revenge. I filled the hole for him, and I never did it. I'll take that. Next Sunday, I'm going to get that pierced. And I told my roommate, who said, listen, Jerry, and I was a singer. He knew, and he was a singer. He said, short of blowing up the chemistry building, there is nothing else you can do on this campus. I said, you watch, but more important, you listen. We get up there, and now, we have the parade, and the girls are there. It's the only time I like this school when you could pick up a girl. So now, the Star Spangled Banner. and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in it. And between the two, I cut loose with a jazz riff. And I thought he would have a stroke. I was rooting for it at that time. I was a snotty kid, like I said. We get back to the band room and he says, don't you ever, 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 ever. And before he goes further, I said, listen, do you know about the Star-Spangled? You know, it's an old English drinking town. It's the song was all about whoring and drinking. And so I think I was showing a great respect because, like the little drummer boy at Christmas, this was my gift to America with the Star-Spangled Banner, with American music. He said, as far as I'm concerned, he never got another word out because the trumpet player yelled, hey, we should keep doing that. We'll be the only band in America that can put jazz into the Star-Spangled Banner. In disgust, he walked out the door.
In attending so many athletic events over the years, and whenever you would hear the national anthem play, did you think about that moment?
Yes, 1,000 times over and over. I hated that. I went back there once. I was the keynotes. The school's out of business. I mean, but for some, particularly in the South, if you go to a prep school like that, you don't go to college. It's your alma mater, and they kept the alumni association going. And now, 60 years after I had graduated, I was the keynote speaker. And I said, I came back here for one reason. I owe a debt to this school. They didn't plan it that way, but I owe them a debt. When someone tells me now I can't, I say, that's what you think, and I'm going to do it. I learned that here because I broke every damn rule this school had. And it was kind of a shock silence, but I didn't care. I had to get it off my chest.
So you're playing the clarinet. I think I remember you said at first somebody told you that your arms weren't long enough to play the trombone. So it's good that you stayed with the clarinet. And you've got a band, you're playing on the side, you play some dances on the side, but then you get to Rutgers. At what point do you move from aspiring to a future in music to sports writing?
Well, yeah, I never did it deliberately. A number of years afterwards, when I was writing for the Ledger, I tried desperately to get out of it. It was always something they said no. As a matter of fact, one day, Mort Pye, who was the editor of the paper, I went to him. I said, listen, I'm tired. I can't honor guys at crooked prize fights for the Star-Spangled Banner or at the Olympics where everybody cheats. I'm just tired of it. I want to do a general column. And he said, let me think about it. And I went back and bothered him because he never said anything. And he said, listen, you are too valuable to us in sports that I can move you. And I said, if that's the case, pay me for my value. That didn't go over very well, and I remained in sports. I'm 92 and I'm still doing it.
You had a notable friendship with Muhammad Ali. Can you tell us a little about him from your perspective? And you've covered a lot of heavyweights. Was Ali truly the greatest?
No. He was a fighter who made the biggest impact on the world. And I use that term advisedly, the world. But as the greatest, the best fighter I ever saw was Sugar Ray Robinson, who I call the real Sugar Ray. And the best heavyweight I ever saw was Joe Louis. And Ali was not a puncher. He wore you down with attrition. Some of the bad guys he fought, he knocked out early. But he was very gifted, and he had the highest boxing IQ I ever saw in the ring. He could change up and do this, he could change up and do that. And he was amazing. But more than that, he was a good friend. He was a very good friend. I'll tell you one thing he did for me that I'll never forget. I was a product of a divorce, okay? And so my kids came to live with me finally. And I don't know what their mother told them about, but they were scared to death when they did. Now, he didn't know my kids, but he knew what had happened. And I went up there to do a show on him. We're driving up in the car, and my daughter, who was then 10, says, I hope George Foreman knocks his block off. So what are you talking about? This is a business, not a pretty one, but it's a business. And afterwards, they'll shake hands and they'll be friends forever. But this is the way they make a living. So when you get up there, first of all, you keep your mouth shut. Robert was interested in television, so I said, you go with my crew. Because I was doing a documentary on it, about his trip to Zaire. And you go with the crew and you pick up stuff and carry it for them, and maybe you'll learn something. She said, well, what am I going to do? I said, you're going to go to Aunt Coretta's kitchen, and you're going to keep your mouth shut, and you're going to smile, and you're going to say you're the water girl, the official water girl for the Jerry Izenberg crew, and she'll give you some water. And if you keep your mouth shut and smile, she'll give you a piece of bean pie, too, which she did. Now it's over. Now we're in the dressing room. Allie says to me, that's your son. Bob was helping him pack up. Is that your boy? I said, yeah. Can I talk to him? Go ahead. Goes, he puts his arm around him. He says, Bob, his name was, nobody called him Bob until it. Bob, you don't mind if I call you Bob? Well, the kid's in heaven, right? And he said, you're living with a great man now. And if you listen to him, you'll be a great man too. That's really what I needed for confidence. Then he looks at me and says, your little girl here. I said, in the back. She knows we're whispering, so she thinks I'm telling him what she said in the car. 10 years old, what would you expect? And she's trying to put her molecules into the wall now so he doesn't notice her. And he says, you out there, your little girl with the braids, you come up here right now, right in front of me. She's scared to death. Walking up, she loses the power of English. She doesn't know any English anymore. He picks her up at home. He's a big guy, and she's a little girl. He's holding her over his head, and he says, that's your daddy? Is that your daddy? Don't you lie to me. That man is not your dad. Look at him. He is ugly. You're beautiful. The gypsies must have brung you. Give me a kiss. We're driving in the car, and she says, oh, I hope he can win. I said, you're like all the other females. The only difference is the age.
It's a great story. Jerry, if it's all right with you now, I'd like to do a lightning round. I'll ask you best player or best sporting event, things like that. So let's start off with best baseball player you ever covered.
Best one I ever covered?
Yep.
Well, you got to distinguish between pitchers and players.
Pitchers?
Well, no, I mean, you have to have one for each. Pitcher was Koufax. Carl Hubble, but I didn't remember much about him, except my father loved him. Baseball player, Willie Mays. But best baseball hitter, Josh Gibson. I saw a lot of black baseball games when I was a kid. Newark Bears were voted the best minor league franchise in history. I saw my first when I was 7. They won by 25 and a half games. And so I knew they were great, and all those guys went up to the majors. But he took me one day to see Hubble. Sellout, Giants Dodgers, of course, because there's only 32,000 seats at Emmett Field. All the Dodger fans come, and the Giants are losers, so there's more Dodger fans than Giant fans in the ballpark. Hubble was pitching. My father wanted me to go because he knew that Hubble, he had one more year, but he thought this would be his last. A sellout. The guy says, well, you got a little kid with you. You don't understand. My father says, give me the standing room tickets. He didn't know who he was talking to. We walk up the ramp, and we don't get very far. And he says, right here, stand by that railing there. I said, all I can see is the pitcher's mound. He said, that's all you have to see. Hubble's pitching with his head, not his arm. He's finished. He pitches 4 great innings with his head. In the 5th inning, it's like an artillery barrage. They're hitting balls everywhere. Mel Ott, the manager, comes out and takes the ball, and he gives it to the pitcher, and he walks back with his arm around Hubble. There's about 45,000 people. They're all on their feet. And the amazing why it struck me so interestingly was that they were mostly Dodger fans, and they were cheering madly. And I said, well, why are they? My father said, because it's baseball. you'll learn. And 40 years, 50 years later, I'm in Okinawa, Japan. I see a stadium. I walk in. There's about 20 people there. There's a high school game going on. And I see a woman in a kimono, because this is right after the Korean War. And she looks at me and she says, "You like the pitcher?" And, "Oh, you like baseball?" I said, "Yeah, I love baseball." She said, "You like the pitcher?" I said, "Well," I'm looking at him. He was typical Japanese pitcher from those days. He got to put it on maybe another 25 pounds if he's going to throw a fastball, but he's interesting. She moves over and sits next to me. She says, "The pitcher is my son. Tell me what you think of him." Well, what am I going to say? But he's doing okay till the ninth inning. He loads the bases. There's 2 men out, and I'm wondering what they're going to do. He strikes the guy out, and he throws a fastball. And I said, "Hey, he's okay." Just then, and this relates back to respect for the game, the winning team runs into the dugout and comes out with rakes and drags. The losing team runs into the stands and they're picking up candy wrappers and popsicle sticks and everything. And then they line up and they face the other team, they bow. Then they face the umpire and they bow. Then the groundskeeper comes out and they bow to the groundskeeper. I said, "What's going on?" She said, "Oh, they must do that." She gave them the park. She said, "Respect for the game." And I thought to myself, if I went back to Newark and any high school you could name and said, "This is what we're going to do," they would look at me and say, "You want us to do what?" Respect for the game.
That's great. Let's continue here with a couple more. Best football player pre-merger.
Well, there again, you got to have backs and you got to have linemen, The best
quarterback.
Quarterback is not Namath. Namath is good, but he's not Namath. But the best quarterback, although I don't like him, is Tom Brady. I mean, there's no question about that.
No, but pre-merger.
Pre-team. Well, I thought the greatest player in the world was Sid Luckman. Number one, we got a Jewish quarterback. Number two, he puts Columbia on the map. Number three, he goes to Chicago to play. Now, my father he would listen to the Army-Navy game. I said, "Why do you root for Army?" He said, "I should root for the Yales, the Princetons, the Harvards who didn't want us." No. I was in the Army. I root for the Army. I said, "Well, I'm going to show you something." It was World Series. The Giants were terrible. The Newark Bears were terrible that year. I don't remember the year automatically. Now the Redskins have beaten the Bears. Now the Bears got to play the Redskins for the title in Washington. Sid Luckman's going to be the quarterback. So my father agrees to listen to the game. He's Jewish. I listen to the game. They win the game 72-0. It's an unbelievable game. And my father put up with the obvious thing that nobody puts up with. He hated Red Barber, a wonderful man, a great announcer who did the Dodger games. Barber was doing the color on Washington and Chicago. And he even put up with Barber because he said he's not so bad. He calls a good game. But when it was 72-0, he couldn't believe it. To my knowledge, my father watched only one other football game, and that's because Sid Luckman was involved. But he watched it in person, as did I. I was a kid, 10, 11 years. They had a rule. Newark had a professional football team, and the Association of Professional Teams was the name of the league. It was a minor league. The Bears were owned by Chicago. The Jersey City Giants were owned by the New York Giants. The Patterson Panthers were owned by the Eagles. The championship game, they allow you to borrow one player from the parent team. The Bears sent Luckman. And my dad took me to the game. And I saw Sid. It's the only time I ever saw Sid Luckman play. We didn't have any television. We didn't have a television in our house till 1950. So, and it was amazing to me to see this guy. They won the game, of course. But it was interesting that he came into my life twice. And later on, when he was retired and working in Chicago, I did see him at the Chicago Giants championship game in Wrigley Field How cold was it? It was so cold that someone handed me a cup of hot chocolate and it was frozen. I mean, it was terrible. That's when Tittle got hit in the knee, went out of the game. The Bears win the game, and I saw Luckman there, and I said, "You know, you're not going to remember me, but I'm never going to forget you. I was, I saw you." He said, "The big game." I said, "No, I saw you in Newark." And they said, "Oh," he said, "I was so mad at them. I don't want to play in that game." I said, "Well, for a guy who didn't want to play, he didn't do too badly."
I think Giants Bears was in 1963. Does that make sense? I think it might have been the Giants Bears
64.
title game.
64.
64. And one more, since we're talking about football, best Super Bowl. You covered so many, more than 50.
I like to say I'm more interested in the people than the score. I mean, and if you don't like that, you don't read me. But that's what I'm interested in, what makes the people. So the first Super Bowl, not the game. Although the Kansas City played a pretty good game, second half, Lombardi killed them. But I go up there. Vince and I were good friends, very good friends. And first of all, I got to tell you a real quick anecdote. Roselle says, "I booked your team." It's for the Super Bowl in California. "I booked your team in to Santa Barbara." He said, "Well, I'm not going there." He said, "I'm taking a team to Ricky's." And Roselle says, "You're taking the team where we can get writers to you and we can make this game work. I'm going to play Ricky." I always had good love. He said, "Do you realize how far away you are from the scene of the game when you go to Palo Alto?" He said, "Why do you think I'm going there?" He said, "Well, I'm telling you why you're not going there." And nobody talked to Vince that way, but he shows up at Santa Barbara. So a good friend I was showing, Jack Murphy, who's gone now, San Diego paper. We traveled so often together. The old horse racing, they used to call us 1 and 1A, same stable, right? Anyway, I said to Jack, "Let's drive up to Santa Barbara and push Lombardi's buttons." So we go up there, and it's beautiful. The ocean is on the right. It's magnificent. And Lombardi is pacing up and down in front of the hotel because he knows we're coming. And he sees us, and he says, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "I was going to ask you the same question. You couldn't be here because somebody made you come here." Because now he's really angry. And he says, and they're laughing because it's a courtyard, and the players are hanging over the railings, and they're laughing because they knew me and they knew I'm going to go push his buttons, and they love it. And he hears them laughing. He turns around and says, "Listen, I don't want to catch one person in the pool today. You understand that? You understand that?" So that was a wonderful thing in itself. Now, the day before, I go upstairs, I talk to Fuzzy Thurston, pulling guard, good ball player. And I said, "What do you know about these guys?" He said, "Nothing. We only saw one." So, "Well, how are you going to play against a team you don't know?" He said, "We're going to win the game. We're going to win it easy because we got the best coach in football." That's what he said. Lombardi didn't hear that. And he wouldn't let Lombardi hear it. Okay. Now I go to see Kansas City. I had a friendship. I was the first white reporter to go to Grambling, Louisiana, Grambling College. I made 10 trips there, did some magazine pieces, and they knew me in town. They blow the horn when I walked by. And it was an all-black town with an all-black school. And Buck Buchanan came out of that school. He was a hell of a player. And he was still steaming 3 years later about what happened to him. They lost the first Super Bowl. So I went to his room. You could do that in those days. Now we can't get near them. I went to his room, and he's sitting there. He'd sit down, and on the bed, face down, I see the spine of a book called Run to Daylight. So he didn't know anything about the Packers either, and he's reading this book. I pick it up and I look at it. I look at what he's reading, and I think, they got no chance. No chance. He's reading a quote from Lombardi to Bill Hines, the writer of the book, and he said, "When we won that sweep," he's just talking about in general, this is written before the Super Bowl. When we won that sweep, I look at the linebacker when he sees Henry Jordan and a blocking back both coming straight for him, and his eyes are both. This is what Buchanan is reading before he's going to play these total strangers. So I made a bet. That was I always cared about people. I really did. If you ask me what fighter made one of the biggest impressions on me ever, you'd think I'd say Ali, wouldn't you? No, I talked about McGuigan, lightweight champion. McGuigan, he was from Northern Ireland. Either he was Protestant and his wife was Catholic, or vice versa. I don't remember which. But he lived in a Catholic neighborhood. And this was when the IRA bombings were really big. They were trying to get Belfast away from Great Britain and make it part of the Irish Free State. And it's probably in the 80s. And I always wanted to know what made people tick. Well, McGuigan is fighting for the title, and it's the one day the Irish, they're all Irish, the Orange men and the Free State people are not killing each other. They're going to the fight. So the promoter knocks on the door, and he says, "Barry me by." It was Barry, yeah. "Barry me by. We got a problem here. I don't know whether to play the soldier song, that's the Free State, or God Save the Rule Britannia when you come into the ring." And he said, "Why? I'm tired of all the singing. I'm tired of all the breastfeeding. Why don't you simply play the Beatles singing 'Why Not Give Peace a Chance'?" And the guy said, "Well, I'll do it if you want it. Well, are you wearing?" He has Robot. "Are you wearing the Shamrock or are you wearing the British Lion?" He's got the UN Dove on his trunks. And he said, "I am tired of this crap. Either they're going to root for me or they're going to root against me. I don't care. There's a much bigger thing at stake than this prize fight." And then after the fight, and it starts again, he deliberately puts his kid in a Catholic school and says, "Come down to my neighborhood and do something about it." I like a guy like that. And that, what he stands for, you have to like. That's what I look for in people.
Jerry, I think that's probably the secret to your success. You know what you said, that it's not just about the scores; it's about the people.
Balls and bats don't play games. People do. And I'll tell you something else. What is the most courageous? I've seen a lot of courageous things, but one of the most courageous things I have ever seen, a Norwegian American, Greta Heights. I think it was Greta Heights. She wanted to make the American Women's Marathon, was the first one, LA. And she didn't make the team. But her mother was Norwegian and she never competed. So she gets the permission and she runs for Norway. Well, it's a marathon is just, how tough it is. Now, it looks like everybody's in. They've already finished. If you've ever been to a track and field meet, things are going on all over the stadium at the same time. High jumpers, this, that, right? All of a sudden, there's a ghost standing in the entrance to the field. The palest, which was Norwegian to begin with, but American, but the palest athlete I've ever seen in my life. She's gasping for air. It's her. She comes and she goes about 20 feet into the stadium and falls. And they rush over to her and she screams, "Don't touch her." If they touch her, she's disqualified. She gets up. She walks another few feet. She falls. She gets up. She crawls. When she's getting to the finish line, she's almost crawling. Gets up and falls, of course. Everybody forgot everything that was going on in that stadium. That whole stadium was on its feet, cheering a woman who probably finished next to last in the marathon. That's courage.
Well, I'm going to close this conversation where we started, back in Newark. What about those hot dogs? Does anything come close to Nedick's when you went to Nedick's with your father?
Well, I thought no, but of course, Nedick's hot dogs are trafe. I mean, I got to say that up front so you know. But they had a monopoly in New York New Jersey, and Connecticut. They were the biggest hot dogs. They were founded in 1913. They went out of business about 20 years ago. And Madison Square Garden, the lobby of Madison Square Garden, half of it, this is the old garden, 49th and 50th, half of it was a Nedick's stand. And Marty Glickman, the Knicks were sponsored by Marty Glickman. And every time Carl Braun went to the foul line, took a shot, Glickman, who did the play-by-play, would say, "It's good, like Nedick's." And Nedick's was good. And the reason it got the name, and the reason it climbed into the book was that walking down the street, my father scared the crap out of me when he said, "They're here now, the Nazis." And I'm looking around, and where are they, And he says, he realized, I said, "But aren't they in Germany?" He said, "They're here." And then he said, because he was thinking about everything. And then he realized that he jolted me a little bit. He showed me guys, Nazis screaming and crying in the theater. He told me they got to be stopped. And now, anyway, to sum it up, he says to me, "Okay, let's have lunch. How about a Nedick's hot dog?" And my retort was, "Only with an orange drink."
Baseball, Nazis, and Nedick's hot dogs. Growing Up Jewish in the 1930s in Newark by Jerry Izenberg is available online wherever you purchase books, and you can read Jerry's latest insights, analysis, and reflections at nj.com. Jerry, it's been a true pleasure speaking with you and listening to your experiences as a reporter and as a Jewish American growing up in Newark as well. Thank you so much for being with us, and wishing you continued success in all you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to legendary sports columnist Jerry Izenberg, and to you for watching this conversation with B'nai B'rith. If you enjoyed this interview, subscribe to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. And be sure to visit b'naibrith.org to learn more about our important work. For my guest, Jerry Izenberg, I'm Dan Mariaschin. See you next time. Take care, everyone.